There must be another way. עיניים אחות, כל מה שליבי מבקש אומרות, עברנו עד כה דרך ארוכה, דרך כה קשה, יד ביד והדמעות זורמות לשווא, כאב ללא שם, אנחנו מחכות רק ליום שיבוא אחרי. There must be another way. There must be another way. عينك بتقول رح يجي يوم وكل الخوف يزول، بعينك إصرار إنه عنا خيار نكمل هالمسار مهما طال، لأنه ما في عنوان وحيد للأحزان، بنادي للمدى للسما العنيدة. There must be another
بس يا بالك تمانين معروفية بقى.
There must be another way. There must be another way. דרך ארוכה נעבור, דרך כה קשה, יחד נעבור, עינגי בתגול, כל החוף יזול. And when I cry for both of us, my pain has no name. And when I cry to the merciless sky and say, there must be another way. והדמעות זורמות לשווא, כאב ללא שם, אנחנו מחכות רק ליום שיבוא אחרי. There must be another way. There must be another way. There must be another way.
Well, that was quite amazing. Hello, salam, shalom, and welcome to our 4th Israeli-Palestinian Peace Symposium series. I'm Fatima Argan, and I'm honored to be co-moderating our program today, which will focus on security with Moshe Chertoff and working with such an amazing lineup of panelists who we will both be introducing shortly. I think the song says it all. I think we're all here because we know that there must be another way. But first, I'm honored to introduce Reverend Dr. Rodney Sadler, who will be giving the invocation. Reverend Dr. Rodney Sadler, a graduate of Howard University, where he got his Bachelor's of Science, Howard University School of Divinity, where he got his Master of Divinity, and Duke University, where he got his PhD, having also studied at Hebrew University, is the Associate Professor of Bible and Director of the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation at Union Presbyterian Seminary, and lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. Thank you, Reverend Sadler. The floor is yours.
I just want to say thank you so much, Fatima, for the introduction, and thank you for that wonderful choir that sang, "There must be a better way." We believe that there must be a better way, that peace is possible. Peace is the only way. And as we begin today, I just want to say that the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation welcomes this symposium as this month, as we do in other months. We want to see this process work. We want to see people come together and recognize our commonness. Let's just begin today with a word of prayer. Holy One, we are all Palestinian, we are all Israeli, we are all American, we are all Jewish, we are all Christian, we are all Muslim, we are all Baha'i, we are all black and brown and white, human people, those whom you have created. We all bleed red blood that enlivens our supple bodies, have dear children whom we love, for whom we want a better future, desire safety, desire peace, desire prosperity, desire love. We are all made in the same God's image. We all breathe the same God's breath. We all share the same life force. We are all one. Holy One, one who made us, help us to see today that we too are one. We too are equal. We too deserve peace. May we, in part because of this conversation today, be convinced that peace is necessary. May we be convinced that peace is the only way. It is by many names that we call on you, but in all of them we are grateful to you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Reverend Sadler, for that very inspirational message. So I'll continue where I left off, and I'll say it again. I'm Fatima Argan, and I believe peace is possible and the only way. Why? And what is peace? Well, I've heard peace be defined as being whole, and I believe that was Reverend Sadler's definition. So I don't want to. I want to give him due credit, and I would agree with that because I think it's really important to have all sides be equally invested in maintaining that whole through a solution that works for all of us. When we all feel that we're all getting a fair shake, essentially, when we can see those outside of our ethnic or faith community as just as deserving of the justice, freedoms, and pursuit of our dreams. When we emphasize, celebrate, and honor our shared heritage. Today's topic is focusing on security because an essential component of peace is security. You have to have security to have peace. Peace is critical to the stability of any functioning society. It's hard to be fully whole when one side or the other feels they're always walking on shaky ground, literally and figuratively. There's no feeling of support from the other side, and consequently a feeling that they are part of that whole. Whether this is the freedom of movement or the freedom not to experience violence. This is a basic human right that we must all recognize. Whether this comes in the form of a one-state or two-state solution or any other, we must feel free to live our lives in a way that we feel we have the ability to fully contribute to our mutual success and mutual coexistence. Peace is not an abstract concept, but a very real outcome that can be achieved when all parties come to the negotiating table in good faith and an unshakable commitment to working out the challenges required to create an agreement that is acceptable to all. It's time to move beyond Band-Aid solutions of ceasefires, of zero-sum games, to work toward a just, equitable, and sustainable peace agreement. I just want to end by saying that we here today are all volunteers. We're all reaching out to you in our personal capacities, and we're all speaking from our hearts. This is real, folks. We're speaking as though our lives depend on peace because, well, they do. At the very least, the quality of our lives does. And I think everyone should and can recognize that. And most importantly, we deeply care. We are here because we care. We care about you. We care about our kids. We care about our families. And we care about the future of their security and their ability to be the best they can, and to, to enable them to contribute as best they can as well. So I'm now going to turn it over to my amazing co-moderator, Moshe Chertoff, who will elaborate further. Take it away, Moshe.
Thank you, Fatima. Thank you, everyone who's contributed so far. And welcome to everybody who has joined us this evening, this afternoon, this morning, wherever you are on the planet. We're all here together. I'm Moshe Chertoff, and I believe that peace is possible, and it's the only way. I'm not representing any organization here other than the steering committee of our voluntary Symposium organization. We, the organizers and speakers, see you as active participants, although we can't offer you a microphone. We're asking you Americans for our help, your help. This is not America forcing its way into a battle zone. It's Israelis and Palestinians who are in urgent need of help to prevent the next mini war or worse. We have taken measures to ensure bringing speakers, including Palestinians and Israelis, Jews and Arabs, Americans, women and men, in short, all who are active in working for an agreement. Some of us are members of any of the over 150 organizations that constantly work daily for a mutual future between Jews and Arabs in Israel and the Palestinian territories. As we often say, Jews and Arabs refuse to be enemies. We will not play the role of the leaders or their negotiating teams. As the organizers, we are not proposing the one-state, two-state, federation, or confederation solutions. Each of our guest speakers will have 5 minutes to make an opening statement and then have more time to answer questions and address the words of the other speakers. They have chosen their own words, and those do not necessarily represent the views of anyone else or the organizers of the symposium. We all agree to respectfully disagree. We warn you, we might use certain terms or words that sound inflammatory or insulting to others. I guarantee you that none of us has any such intent. As Brother Rodney often reminds us, we speak with love speech, and we apologize if something one of us has said has caused either pain or anger. We will present the other side of the Israeli-Palestinian reality you almost never see or hear about. Mainstream American and international media won't show you any more than the tip of the iceberg. But you can't be expected to take university courses to learn about it all. Get energized by our speakers. We hope you tell your senators and representatives that they should encourage the Biden-Harris administration to prioritize Israeli-Palestinian conflict higher and with urgency. And now my personal message. I did 2 years of regular duty and another 20 years of reserves in the Israeli Defense Forces. And after serving in the Sinai and on all of our fronts, in 1982, I was even sent to Beirut. It changed my understanding of what must be done if we ever want to live secure and normal lives. And then I must also do it, not just wait for our leaders to do it. We call it citizen diplomacy. In 2003, I had the great honor of editing the entire post-publication English version of the Geneva Initiative Final Status Agreement. Yet 18 years later, here we are, holding an agreement that was signed by both Palestinian and Israeli negotiators, waiting for progress that will end our conflict, our suffering, and death. I believe that to be really pro-Israeli, one must also be pro-Palestinian, and vice versa. Because if only one side wins, both sides really lose. Thank you. And now it's my honor to introduce my co-founder of this symposium series, and he's the father of it all, who threw it at my feet well over a year ago, and we've been working on it ever since, Brother Joel Seagal. Joel was the longtime legislative assistant to the legendary Congressman John Conyers of Michigan, and Joel authored Medicare for All, the single-payer healthcare plan that led to the passage by President Obama of what is now referred to as Obamacare. And in that capacity with the congressman, he served administration going back to Bush and Clinton and was brought in as a consultant for Israel-Palestine to Secretary of State John Kerry. Today, Joel is leading a number of national and international campaigns, just fabulous things that are mind-boggling. and he's doing many of them, not just one. But instead of shortchanging Joel, I'll let Joel further introduce himself and offer his expertise for us all to hear. Joel, take it away. Brother Joel.
Hello, Moshe. Reverend Sadler, thank you for your invocation. Fatima, thank you for your leadership. And to my extended family across the pond in Israel and Palestine, I send you warm greetings. Representative Connors used to say, we're all an extended family for peace and social justice. When I worked for John Conyers between 2000 and 2013, I was the lead staffer on universal health care and global AIDS, Hurricane Katrina. And I was his representative when I spoke to Arab organizations, Jewish organizations. I never knew why, but that's what I did. Muslim organizations. And during that time period, I became very close to the former PLO ambassador in Washington, D.C., named Afif Safia. And Ambassador Safia challenged me and opened up my mind on peace between Israelis and Palestinians. During the time period, I became very close to many colleagues and dear friends for several diplomats, both in the Arab League, both Palestinian and Israeli, who worked on the Geneva Accord. And I came to a conclusion. The majority of Israelis and the Palestinians want not just peace, but a just peace. That we don't want a continued occupation of Palestine. Palestine's been occupied for over 120 years, from the Turks to the Egyptians to the British and now Israel. I was privy to conversations with members of Congress and senior level Hill staffers that disturbed me over that time period. What I often heard from staffers, from members, from AIPAC, and many organizations, both Jewish and Christian, was that it was their sincere belief that if there was the establishment of a Palestinian state, that would create the ultimate destruction and demise of Israel. Even though I feel like that is based on what New York Times editorial writer Paul Krugman calls intellectual confusion, it still is something that we must deal with. I often go to services at conservative temples, Reform temples, and Orthodox temples. I hear the same thing. If there's a Palestinian state, that'll end up in the destruction of Israel. I beg to differ. If there's a Palestinian state and a peace agreement that is signed between the Israelis and the Palestinians and the Arab world, it'll make Israel much safer, just as it has when Israel signed a peace agreement with Egypt. Israel much safer. Jordan, Israel much safer. The Palestinian Authority, because of Oslo, much safer. We must have a conversation, and we begin today, on how do we address real fears, whether we agree with them or not, in the American Jewish community and in Congress, that's literally strangling the peace process. We need President Biden and the U.S. Congress to re-engage in the peace process. President Biden is going to have to show leadership and bring the Palestinian leaders and Israeli leaders to the peace table to sign what was promised in the Oslo Accords, a final status peace agreement. That is not going to happen unless Israelis and Palestinians urge President Biden and the Congress that it's in the best interest of Israelis and Palestinians to have a peace summit. However, as long as there are powerful special interests putting pressure on members of Congress and staff, dissuading them from engaging in diplomacy, that's not going to happen. Members of Congress literally fear their seats will be taken and they'll lose their election if they are pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian. Thank God for J Street, a progressive organization in Washington, D.C., that works with members of Congress that I think is reducing that fear, but they can't do it by themselves. Our job is to make sure that we give the most cogent, logical arguments that there can be peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians. Thank you.
Excellent.
Sorry.
Fatima.
I had a moment to take myself off mute. Thank you, Joel, for that incredible summary, and I think that really helps to set the stage for giving our speakers a lot of food for thought. So going forward, I am going to introduce our first speaker. We are finally there, folks. Our first speaker is Elias Zananiri, and
Elias is the vice chair of the PLO Committee for Interaction with Israeli Society, and he often appears in Israel, and he's a great speaker.
Thank you, Moshe. Take it away, Elias.
Let me.
There are connection problems sometimes in the occupied territories. They have a lower level of internet connection. Elias, can you try again?
Well, this is Elias again. I'm Elias, and I believe that peace is possible. Not only that it is possible, but it is the only way to end this conflict. Otherwise, we both, Palestinians and Israelis, will end up doomed to fight each other on a track of what I call mutual destruction. We don't need to be there. We don't want to get there. I think there is still a window of opportunity that has to be grasped soon, and the sooner the better. On this evening, I would really appeal to everyone who has any access to the Biden administration, to the congressmen, to the senators, to make sure that they understand that time is of the essence, and we don't have the luxury that President Clinton thought he had back in 2000, or President Obama thought that he had in his second term, because what happens is that that window of opportunity is closing really, and I think that we should not wait until time is ripe for a proactive American intervention by the Biden administration to bring the two sides together in a. I don't know whether it's going to be like the format of Camp David or whatever, but the issue is to convene a summit, international conference, like what President Mahmoud Abbas has been demanding lately, or in any other format. What matters is to reach an agreement, to sign an agreement based on the two-state solution. We have no reason. There is nothing. We don't need to create what kind of or think of what kind of a solution we need, because everything is known. The final status of the occupied territories is already known in a way for the whole universe. The UN resolutions made it very clear. The two-state solution have to be based on the 1967 lines, and I think that all what we need is a decision and a timetable to implement that resolution. I think it is very important for us. We Palestinians and Israelis are sick and tired of the violence and wars and terror attacks and airstrikes, whatever you name it, and we strongly believe time has come, and the moment, since we can speak to each other, whether in Tel Aviv or in Ramallah, provided their permits are available for both sides to meet and cross the green line into Israel, or from Israel into the PA areas, then we are capable of living in peace. And I think that the overwhelming majority of the Palestinians and the Israelis want the two-state solution, want this conflict to end, even though there is skepticism that this is not doable these days. You in the United States of America can help us to remove that skepticism, delete it from the people's mindset, and prove that there is a way to do it, and that the only way to do it and end this conflict is by negotiations, and negotiated and agreed upon settlement. And I think this is the main message that I have, and I will be happy to answer or entertain any other question anywhere down the line. So now I even finished before 5 minutes. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Elias. It's always a pleasure to hear you speak. I will take the opportunity to introduce our next speaker. Anat Saragusti is an Israeli journalist, publicist, feminist, and human rights activist, and the list is far longer than that. And I mentioned that I was in Beirut in 1982, and I don't know if it's a secret or not, but I think you were there too. And we didn't meet for coffee, but one of these days, maybe, inshallah. So please, honored to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Well, I'm an Israeli, a Jewish Israeli. I was born in Jerusalem. My family came to the region more than 500 years ago when the Jews were expelled from Spain during the Inquisition in the 15th century. My mother grew up in the old city of Jerusalem, and her family had to leave the Jewish quarter during the War of Independence in 1948, and they became refugees and had to find a new place to live. Both my mother and my father are coming from bereaved families. Each of them lost a brother to the conflict, and I belong to the peace camp in Israel. I'm giving you points from my biography because it shaped my worldview and my values. I know that I am privileged as an Israeli and especially as a Jew. I live in a relatively democratic country. We have functioning institutions. We have a strong enough judicial system and law enforcement agencies. We experience economic prosperity. We have free and cheap access to drinking water, to infrastructure, to electricity. We enjoy functioning services. We have voting system. We have a parliament of representatives. We have a strong and vibrant civil society. We have a strong army to protect us. We have a strong diplomatic position in the world. We have a strong connection to other strong countries. We have strong allies based on mutual economic, diplomatic, security, and other interests. We have a strong health system. It's really important now during the COVID. We enjoy freedom of speech, freedom of movement, independent and relatively functioning and kicking press. We have strong journalists who enjoy press freedom. Nothing of the above is obvious and not taken for granted, especially when we look around at the entire region. I have to say that my neighbor Palestinians don't enjoy most of these services. I will add that as a professional journalist, I had the privilege to cover the conflict for some decades, which enables me to create and shape a worldview that is based on a lot of knowledge and understanding of the situation and close personal knowledge from the ground. As Moshe said, I was in Beirut in 1982 as a journalist and met with Yasser Arafat. This was the first interview Arafat gave to an Israeli press. For years, I believe that there is a very simple formula to solve the conflict, a formula that is based mainly on equity, a two-state solution, self-determination, clear borders, partition of Jerusalem, healthy relations between the two national entities, addressing all the core issues based on fairness and equality. But things have changed on the ground. I will not dive into the reasons behind the change, but reality is now different than it was decades ago. And I feel that the two-state solution is not realistic anymore. I say it with a sadness. I'm terrified from the turn of the direction that the conflict took. In my view, it used to be a national political-based conflict, and now it is much more a religious-oriented conflict. In both sides, we see more messianic approach to the core of the conflict. I don't intend to speak on behalf of the Palestinians or the Muslims, but as a secular Israeli woman who believes in universal liberal values based on equality and human rights, I'm terrified from the voices in my own society that raise the flag of Jewish superiority, what once used to be the infrastructure of our law of return for the Jews that meant to provide rescue for Jews to address and handle anti-Semitism, turned into a tool to preserve not only the majority of the Jews in the country, but also to maintain and strengthen the superiority of the Jews in comparison to the Palestinian citizens of Israel, but also vis-a-vis the peace talks, if there is any peace talks. I see people who grew up in their worldview, and their worldview was shaped in this school of thoughts of our right on the entire land based on some religious scriptures. Like we say in Israel, they say in Israel, the land of Israel, the Torah of Israel, and the people of Israel. These are the three main issues. I see them holding senior position and very influential position in decision-making processes in forums that allocate state budget. I see how this worldview have settled in the syllabuses of the school systems all over the country. And it is the major tool to shape the worldview of our children. The outcome of this turn in the conflict, in the approach to the conflict, is toxic in my view. It shuts down any opportunity to any kind of negotiations that will be based on equity between the Israelis and the Palestinians. That should force us to change our language and our tools and reshape our solutions. I still believe that peace is possible, and I believe that this is the only solution to the conflict. And no army can have a solution to the conflict, and no force can force anybody a solution to the conflict. So we must hold on to the hope and do everything we can, all of us who believe in this opportunity and this hope, all of us should unite and in a solidarity work together towards peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Anat, for that incredibly beautiful and moving personal story, because the personal stories I find are the most impactful. So I always enjoy those the most. Okay, so I'm going to go on to our next speaker, and our next speaker is Nimrod Novik. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Nimrod Novik is a member of the board of directors at the Commanders for Israel's Security, CIS, and the Israel Fellow at the Israel Policy Forum, IPF. The floor is all yours, Nimrod.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me on this important conversation. And I believe that you have chosen the right topic to address in focusing on the issue of security. Because when it comes to security, as was already mentioned by Joel, there are different approaches, there are different perceptions, and Israelis are as divided as a people as each Israeli is divided in himself. I mean, we live with a split personality on the issue of security. On the one hand, we are all rational, and we all know, and pardon the lack of humility, that in regional terms, Israel is awesome. Ehud Barak was the first one to coin the phrase that Israel is the strongest power within 1,000 miles in every direction from Jerusalem. And this has not changed since the days that he coined that phrase. Anat mentioned our other accomplishments that we're very proud of in civil areas and otherwise. But in terms of security, which is the focus of the moment, it is quite clear to anybody who studies this professionally that Israel is stronger than any combination of security challenges. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, the same Israeli is frightened in the most concrete way from evacuating the West Bank and facing a situation where what happened in Gaza when we evacuated and the result was terror and rockets and civilian casualties and misery to Gazans will happen on the West Bank. Why shouldn't it be if that was the precedent? Well, as you mentioned, I belong to a group called Commanders for Israel Security, which is well over 300 retired generals and their equivalents from the Mossad, Shin Bet, police, and National Security Council. And as an organized group, they are by far the largest group of Israelis with security expertise who are unified around this one issue, the issue of the need to get to a two-state solution. And these people, and I'm sure that General Yair Golan will second that, are convinced that there is no security solution, military solution to political problems, that however strong we are, there's a limit, quite obvious limit, to our security capabilities, and that the only future is in a mutually negotiated agreement where we will insist on our security needs. Palestinians will rightfully insist on their rights for a sovereign, contiguous state, and the two sides will get to the point where they sign a deal. To get there, and I'm focused on the Israeli audience, naturally, that's my home. I've been in this business of negotiating with our neighbors since early in the 1980s. I participated in negotiations with the Egyptians, with the Jordanians, with the Syrians, with countries in the Gulf, and certainly longest and most frequently with our Palestinian neighbors. The pictures that you cannot see that are hanging on my wall are with Abu Mazen, President Mahmoud Abbas, with Saib Erekat, the late Saib Erekat, the legendary Palestinian negotiator, with Rabin and Peres and Mubarak and everybody else in the region, having negotiated or participated in the negotiations with all of them. In all of that, it was quite clear, and I still remember the voices that objected to peace with Egypt. In the negotiations with Egypt, Israel was called upon to return to Egypt a territory 3 times the size of Israel. A territory that served as a security barrier between us and the Egyptian forces. And our leader, Menachem Begin at the time, knew better than to rely only on strategic depth. And he was willing to venture that Egypt was serious in turning the corner on the road of war. And people called upon him as a traitor and demonstrated against him and told him that he is giving up a tangible asset of huge territorial distance in return for a piece of paper that would be signed and disappear the morning after. And here we are 40 years later. And it turns out that the Egyptians, like Israelis, wanted peace. And once they got it, they cherish it. The same holds true about Palestinians and Israelis. Peace between Israelis and Palestinians is doable. The road there is not going to be short. Bringing the parties to the table, I'm afraid, prematurely is a prescription for failure. But that does not mean that we should not do everything to preserve and improve the conditions for future decisions when the stars are aligned again and we again have leaderships in Palestine, in Israel, and in Washington that is capable and willing to engage in this endeavor the same way that we had President Carter, President Sadat, and Prime Minister Begin 40 years ago. My last comment. When it comes to that issue of security that Israelis are so concerned about, we at Commanders jointly with an American think tank, the Center for a New American Security, I have decided to study the issue seriously, not sloganeering, but professional analysis of what it takes for Israelis to have their security and Palestinians to have their deserved dignity. How Israeli security does not have to impinge on Palestinian sovereignty. We came up with a study that is now flashing on the screen. It's called the Security System for the Two-State Solution. The four co-authors were Colonel Chris Bowman from the United States, who was Chief of Staff of General Allen, for those who remember him. Ilan Goldenberg, who was Chief of Staff of the Special Envoy during the Kerry mission. General Gadi Shamni of the Israeli Armed Forces, retired, and myself. But we had with us 9,000 years of cumulative expertise of the 300 Israeli generals retired who worked on this study. And you know, when you study any issue, you have around the table 100 years of experience in Air Force, in intelligence, in ground forces, in cyber control, and all the other disciplines that are required in order to establish a security arrangement for a two-state solution. And our bottom line was that not only those who claim that peace and security are mutually exclusive and incompatible, but the opposite is true. Peace and security are mutually reinforcing. Thank you.
Moshe, you're on mute.
Excellent, Nimrod. Thank you very much. That was enlightening. Very good. I will introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. Warda Saqa. I hope I pronounced it correctly. And she is a representative of Women Wage Peace, a major organization between Israeli and Palestinian women who are making fabulous progress, marching through the desert and across the entire state of Israel and Palestine all the way to the Dead Sea. They've got thousands and thousands of members all around. And Warda is also a co-leader of Israelis and Palestinians for Peace, an organization that is grassroots and sprung up not long ago and has tremendous support from all of the various peace organizations in particular. So Dr. Saqa, please, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone from all the world. I heard everybody who spoke before me. I will not speak about the macro. I will speak about the micro. My name is Warda. I'm an Israeli-Palestinian born in Kfar Yassif in the Galilee. I'm a mother of 3 children. I was a chemist teacher in Arabic and Jewish schools, then moved to be a lecturer and mentor for pre-service teachers in a college of education. I'm a social activist since I was 14, trying to find out how to be a good and fair society. I live in Beit Jala now, a city between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. I used to live in Jerusalem in Beit Safafa, a beautiful small Palestinian village which has been annexed to Jerusalem as an Arabic neighborhood, but I decided to move to Beit Jala. You know why? It's a long story, but I'll shorten it. My children attended a German school in Beit Jala that was located in Area C near Har Gilo settlement. I lived then in Beit Safafa. To attend to the school, we had to go through a checkpoint. My story started when I was the parents' council chief at the school. Once there was an open activity day where the children also displayed their paintings, art in a gallery, besides sports, music, etc. The director of the day accompanied me as a parent's representative to show the gallery of the children. I came to a painting that nailed me to the floor. In the picture, there was an Arab woman crying, her hands on her head, tearing in her knees. Over her head was standing a soldier with his weapon aimed at her, when next to her was a baby on his basket crying, and another soldier aimed his weapon on him. In addition, there was a separation wall when a man was trying to climb on it by a small ladder, while another one was falling. On the top of the wall was a third soldier with his weapon addressed to the climbing man and the one who was falling up down. I was shocked and asked the teacher what happened to that child who drew this picture. What was he passing through? He looked at me and asked me to look at the signature. It was my son's painting. It was my son's painting. I couldn't believe it. How come I didn't see how my son or my children feel when they were crossing the checkpoints? How come I didn't realize their thoughts when they of what they are seeing? We decided to move near the school to avoid passing through the checkpoints. So I live now in Beit Jala after the checkpoint. Unfortunately, these images are repetitive. A picture of soldier aiming his weapon to children, babies, women are still in the view. Recently, many Israelis have begun to recognize this reality and take photos to raise awareness of what happens through the occupation. So if talking about security, well, that's the security for me as a mother, as a parent. That's my child will sleep peacefully when in his little head there are only images of joy and happiness, not pain, suppression, or frustration. And what about the 18 years old soldier who raised a weapon on a baby or a peaceful woman? Tomorrow he will be a father and he will remember what he did. How will he treat his son or look at his child eyes when speaking about love, humanity, and future? So my activism now is raising the awareness, and I'm not only in Women Wage Peace member in Women Wage Peace. I'm a member in many organizations. All my time I give it to bring peace, to bring awareness, to move for that kind of security. Peace for me is security, and security for me is peace. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Warda. I would like to mention, please excuse me for 1 minute. I would just like to mention to those of you who have not been with us in previous symposia, we have tried to have always experts in the field, but also average citizens who will express the way they are living with, on the Israeli side, constant dangers as a result of the conflict and sending children to the army. And on the Palestinian side, people who have difficult conditions every day, every night. And we're trying to bring that forward also. So remember to stay with us, because we also will have more symposia, and we will be addressing various topics. We'll talk about that toward the end of our symposium tonight. Fatima, please go ahead.
Thank you, Moshe, for that added perspective. And thank you once again, Warda, for your very moving story. It's stories like that I, once again, I'll say it, that I think are very, very impactful. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our last speaker. who is a member of the Knesset, Yair Golan, who is the Deputy Minister of Economy and Industry and a member of the Knesset from the Meretz Party, and also a former Assistant Chief of Staff with the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF. We're pleased to have you, Member Golan. Please, the floor is yours. And I believe you're on mute. There you go.
There. Oh, once again.
Try to. Oh,
There we are.
all right.
Excellent.
Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, good evening or good noon, depend where is your exact location. I would like to say that, well, to bring the angle or the security point of view in the following way. No doubt that Israel challenged two main threats or two main security challenges. The first one is the Iranian one, and I have no intention to discuss it in depth, just to mention it. And the second one is the Palestinian challenge. I consider the Palestinian challenge much more serious and much more crucial to the destiny of Israel. Along the way, along the history, we have managed to cope with external threats with external challenges in quite a successful way. But this is much more complicated, and I would say it's a major threat to the cohesiveness of the Israeli society. So therefore, unfortunately, the Palestinian issue doesn't get enough, I would say, enough intention in this current government, which is truly divided between left and right. I would say between left and extreme right. And right now it looks quite gloomy concerning the possibility of any positive movement concerning the two-state solution. But I would like to say that also we need to be optimistic and realistic at the same time. Optimistic because without it, we won't do anything. And this sense of pessimism, which was supported heavily by Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud party, well, this is something we need to take out of our political life. So we need to believe. We need to believe, and we need to work. Yes, and we know from our experience that there are, ups and downs. It won't be in the future any smooth way. It won't be easy. It won't be short process. What we need to cope with is a long-lasting, complicated process. Something which could pour nations easily. Something which really needs a very strong and stable leadership in order to cope with. We should not consider this separation of the land, of the biblical land, as an easy issue. Among the Israelis and the Palestinians, it's a very emotional issue, account between the two people. So, yes, it's going to be hard, long-lasting process. But we need to admit that the best way is to achieve some sort of a multinational, multilateral solution. I believe that in a way to bring to the process powers, other powers, superpowers that could, support the peace process, that could enlarge the security and more benefits to both nations. To achieve multilateral agreement, well, it's very, very complicated. So the other option is to work hard in order to achieve bilateral solution. But we have tried this way previously. Unfortunately, with a lot of difficulties, and we didn't reach the desirable agreement. I'm not sure whether today it's still valid in the are heavily divided. Abu Mazen is not a young man. Well, from the Israeli side, as I mentioned, it's very, very complicated politically. I don't know whether we can move through a bilateral process tomorrow morning. Probably no. And therefore, I think that we need to think in Israel about unilateral measures. Unilateral measures that lessen the complexity of the situation. Unilateral measures that could provide some sort of hope for both nations. Unilateral measures that could provide better life for the Palestinians, and at the same time to ensure the security of Israelis. This is complicated. This is a tough process.
Yair, please take another sentence or two, and please take another sentence or two. Right. The time is nearly up. Thank you.
Yeah, and therefore, I think that we need to think about all possibilities, and I'm still convinced that we need to separate ourselves from the Palestinians in order to achieve stability, prosperity, and peace for both nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would just like to inform everyone who might have noticed that there were problems in Yair's connection. I think he came to us almost directly from the Knesset and didn't have really time to prepare his system. So Yair, if you could either connect with a cable, or if you're on a telephone, get to a place with a little better connection, that would be great. It was hard. We had a difficult time hearing
I'll do my best. I'll do my best.
Thank you I'm sure you will. I have no doubt. Thank you very much. We're honored to have you with us. Thank you. Fatima, please, we finished our opening statements of all of our speakers, and Fatima will now start a few questions that we have. We're doing very well in terms of time. We've stayed on schedule. So Fatima will ask the first question, and each or any of the speakers will have 1 to 2 minutes to address the question. Please try to remain in that framework. Thank you. Fatima.
Thank you, Moshe. So as Moshe said, I will be moving on to the part of our program where we will be asking our speakers questions about what they just related to us. So the first question, I will read the first question, which is, what does security mean for you, an Israeli or a Palestinian? You can, who wants to be the first to respond to that question?
Anat,
I believe Anat has her hand up.
Anat will go
Please.
Okay, I'll be the first. I'll jump in.
1 minute, please. Yeah. Thank you.
So I understand that each country has the right to have state security, and I think in the Israeli-Palestinian context there is state security and personal security. They don't always align. And for me, when we say state security, it means allocating a huge part of our budget, like around 15% of our budget, to purchase, the more advanced equipment for the army. It means male dominance. It means militarized society. It means that, and I think we could hear that both in what Nimrod Novik was saying and Yair Golan. It means that the majority of the people who grew up in the army and ex-generals grew up in the same school of thoughts. And therefore, their solutions are mostly the same. And so we're lacking a different and creative worldview that will be part of the decision-making processes. Mainly, the civil angle of looking at things and what security means, and of course the angle of that women can bring to the table. They are absent from the table almost always. So when we speak about state security, it doesn't necessarily align with personal security. I also want to say that lately there is a strong linkage between security, Zionism, patriotism, and supremacy of the Jews in the country. And the Arab citizens of Israel don't enjoy the same security that the Jews enjoys. So security for whom? So when you say security, it doesn't apply to all the citizens of Israel, and this has to be taken into consideration as well. So asking about what security is, it's puzzling, and I want to introduce or ask you to open yourself and to think out of the box. Thank you.
Thank you, Anat. That was, I really appreciated your perspective, especially on what it means for women. And I would love to talk to you more about that at another time. I'd love to continue that conversation with you. Who wants to be next? Does anyone else have
Nimrod had his hand up.
Nimrod has a perspective. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Let me put my answer in a certain perspective, and I think Elias Zananiri will be able to.
Please. Sorry.
1
minute, please.
Yes, of course. Elias could confirm what I'm about to say. I have many friends. I feel quite at home in Ramallah. I have many friends among the leadership of the Palestinian Authority. Generations of the Palestinian Authority leadership have been to our home for dinners with the Israeli leaders of the peace camp, and so on and so forth. But I'm in this business not because of the Palestinians. I want to be candid. I'm in this business because of the Israelis. My concern is my children, my grandchildren, and those yet to come. And for me, security is something that I zoom out from the current reality. And for me, security is guaranteeing that future generations of Israelis will live in a strong, secure democracy with a Jewish character. And that can only be accomplished by a negotiated two-state agreement.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Elias, you had your hand up before. You want to address this, I'm sure.
Well, security, I would first say that I understand the security concerns of Israelis because I was there when there were the waves of terror attacks that wrecked Israel in the second Intifada, and I happened to be there as a journalist and know what it means. And I also I would hope likewise that the Israeli public and the international community understand our fear as Palestinians living under occupation, because there is also the fear that you might be either kidnapped or by Jewish settlers, shot at by settlers, as a farmer working and farmers working their in their fields, and all of a sudden settlers would attack them, take over their olive crop, and leave and steal their olives under the nose of the Israeli soldiers, and all sorts of security risks that disrupt the normal life of any person that any person is entitled to all over the world. I know that there are always risks in making peace, but I believe that the risk we take, Palestinians and Israelis, in reaching an agreement, in making peace between the two sides, is a lot less risky than the current situation, when there is no hope, when there is no solution, when there is nothing but occupation, and then occupation that keeps changing the facts on the ground and forcing fait accompli on the ground to make the two-state solution almost impossible. This has to stop, and it has to stop now. Thank you.
Thank you, Elias. Does we have time for one more response on this question? Warda, would you like to give your perspective on that? You're on mute.
So I'm a researcher, and usually when I was asked to speak how people think about security, I addressed this question to many people in my Facebook, and especially for Palestinians, and young and older. So most of the young people, so I'm taking you again from the macro to the micro, from, the big picture to the small picture that connected to the people. So most of the young people said that security is a word means to go any place and come safe to your home, to go to your work and get what you deserve without feeling abused or discriminated, to feel free to think and dream about your future without cutting that dream by destroying the way to get it. So older people said security is to sleep in your home without feeling someone is going to expel you out. It's still living the trauma of the Nakba. So most of the Palestinians connect security with the feeling of freedom to live safely, to work and gain life cost, to study and think about the future, and mostly to live in your home safely without feeling that someone is threatening you.
Thank you, Warda. Again, these wonderful personal perspectives. Do we have anyone else who wants
yes,
to?
Yes, I'd like just to add something to what Anat said, because I'm not sure that most of our friends overseas understand the reality here, and that is when she related to the fact that Palestinian security is not necessarily parallel or anywhere near what it is for Israelis or Jewish Israelis. Even within Israel, people should know that there's a horrific wave of crime going on, of murders. We've had over 100 people murdered in the Arab community in Israel. It's not happening in the occupied territories. And part of the horrific side of that is that even at one beach where there was once an Arab who was murdered there, and then later a Jew was murdered there, months afterwards, the case of the Arab being murdered was not even solved. It wasn't properly investigated. Although 3 days later, there was already people captured who had murdered the Jew in the same place, in the very same place. So they have a very horrific situation. And we should also understand that as I worry for my brethren in the United States, my family, my friends, and let's say Jews around the world, Palestinians living within Israel also have to worry about their Palestinian families who live in the West Bank or in Gaza or also other places around the world. So it's a different sense of security or lack of security. So having said that, I want to pass on the microphone to Joel, who will be asking a question from his perspective as a security specialist. So go for it, Joel.
First of all, thank you. These are some of the best panelists that I've ever heard. I've done 20 years of congressional hearings and briefings, and I will announce publicly that You will all be invited to make your presentations in front of Congress sooner than later, and I would like to try to get you in front of the Biden administration. That is not a fantasy, that is a promise, and it is going to happen. So thank you very much for being who you are, because this isn't just some Zoom thing. This is going to happen in real time. Here's my question. If you look at the history of occupations, whether it was the British occupation of America, the British occupation, whether it was African countries, the French occupation of Haiti, the British occupation of Palestine, the British occupation of Northern Ireland, there was always two kinds of resistance, peaceful or military. We all know that occupations in the long run don't work to make anybody safe. Furthermore, we also know that there were many Israeli generals who opposed the occupation when it was first imposed on the Palestinian people, because they feared that it would foment violence. Turns out that they were right. So let's be clear. Occupation is a failed policy to keep either the Palestinians or the Israelis safe. I'm going to ask a question to General Golan, Elias, and Nimrod, and then anyone else. Is it not the case that whenever you sign a permanent status of forces peace agreement, that once you demarcate the borders, which would probably be 67 borders, there would probably be land swaps. This was the PLO plan that I got to actually see. The land swap was East Jerusalem, where it became a capital of the Palestinian nation, with a land swap, which would be smaller settlements that were removed under Israeli control. Is it not the case that we could look at other peace proposals, such as the 38th parallel between North and South Korea, which has kept South Korea safe from any incursion from the North Koreans since its inception? Is it not the case that whenever there's peace agreements between former enemies, they have troops and borders and iron domes and sensors and inspections? So why couldn't that be done in a permanent status peace agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians? And that's to have, whether it's, I'm not an expert like General Golan is, but whether they were Israeli troops or US troops, would that be something that Israelis would accept and Palestinians would accept, some kind of a peacekeeping force? And the second question is very simple. According to my relationships with the PLO and the PA, the real problem would not be between the Palestinian Authority and Israel. It would be possible conflict between a Palestinian state, where it would be Hamas versus the Palestinian Authority, who are at odds, and there's tremendous friction. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. That's quite a complicated question, and it could go a lot of different ways. I'm thinking, I would like to see Yair Golan, if he is still on, answer that question.
Yes, I just chatted with him. He's dealing with, as a deputy minister, he's dealing with the crisis in the ministry, and he'll try to get back to us as soon as he can. I apologize.
I'm sorry. Okay, then who else would like to take on that question? Nimrod, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Yes, I will deal only with the first question. The second question is an internal Palestinian issue. And I'm sure that once there is a peace agreement, it will so empower the Palestinian Authority that will become Palestinian government, that I think that the issues that we are struggling with, Hamas and others, will look quite differently post-agreement implementation than they do today. But I want to talk about the first one. And it was no accident that I asked to flash the cover of the study on security arrangements for a two-state solution that we did a few years ago as Commanders for Israel Security. In that study, and I will not belabor the point too much, but straight to your question, the model that we have developed for security arrangements between Israel and Palestine is far more sophisticated, I think, and robust than a third party serving as a deterrence. We're going for something much more thorough than that. We're talking about what will the border regime between Israel and Palestine look like? What will Palestinian demilitarization, what does it mean, a demilitarized state, which the Palestinians agree to, and not just agree? I can say, because he made it public, the late Cyber Akkad used to tell us, we don't want an army. We don't want to spend money on an army that in any event will not be a match either to threats from the east or threats from the west. Our security will rely on our peace relations with you, Israelis. So Palestine will be demilitarized. That's layer 2. Layer 3, what will the border between Palestine and the outer country look like? Between Palestine and Jordan in one hand and Palestine and Egypt on the other. How does the robust security arrangement there operate? Layer 4, what does the security depth that Jordan offers Israel and Egypt in the Sinai offers Israel look like in a peaceful relation? Layer 5, the Abraham Accords suddenly make real what we wrote 5 years ago and was not, and that is a regional layer of security for Israel. And that's not all. It goes way beyond that. So, to your question, yes, security arrangements that upgrade Israeli security in a peaceful relation are doable. They do not infringe on Palestinian sovereignty in ways that Palestinians will not agree to. But it will take political leadership in Israel to market it to the Israeli public.
If I may, first of all, thank you very much, Nimrod. That was fabulous. I would ask that you take another 30 seconds, if you would, to inform our viewers about the cooperation that already exists between the Palestinian Authority and the IDF, and which has proven successful beyond anyone's expectations, if I'm not mistaken. So if you could elaborate on that for about 30 seconds, that would be fabulous. Thank you.
Let me do it in the simplest way. 2 weeks ago, the chief of our internal security service, Shin Bet, retired. In his parting speech to the government, he warned the government that the Palestinian Authority is losing ground with the Palestinian public, that the Palestinian Authority is weak economically, and he urged the Israeli government to engage the Palestinian Authority on multiple ways in order to restore cooperation and reverse the Israeli policy of the last decade of weakening the Palestinian Authority, because our internal security service, as well as the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, keep reporting to the Knesset on a regular basis their great appreciation for the professionalism of the Palestinian security forces, who are trained under the leadership of a 3- or 2-star US general by the international community. They are professionals, they take their job seriously, and their coordination with our forces is credited with saving thousands of Israeli lives. And if we want the Palestinian security services to continue operating, they have to feel that they are serving the Palestinian aspirations and not the Israeli occupation. And for that, they need to feel that there is a political horizon of a 2-state solution that is real, reachable, even if the road there is not going to be short, as General Golan already mentioned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nimrod. I believe Elias had his hand up as well.
Yeah. Well, I agree with what Nimrod said. And in fact, what matters when it comes to security coordination, any security arrangements that are agreed upon by the two sides are perfect, no matter what they are and no matter how they look. Because on our part, and I know that Cybercat meant what he said. I also said something similar in most of my appearances before Palestinian public and youths who are not articulate in their political thinking, and they would just grill us with the criticism. How would you accept a demilitarized Palestinian state? And the answer is simple. I usually put it in very simple English and say that the money we spend for a tank, to buy a tank, can be spent in building a school, and the money we spend on an F-16, if the US agrees to sell us an F-16s, then that money can go to building a hospital rather than buy a plane that can be shot down by the Israeli Air Force in less than a second, or in a fraction of a second. In other words, we have no reason to have an army or a fully militarized state, because we have seen enough of military powers in the region, and nothing justifies holding or keeping an army that we already know that we are going on a march of building our own personality as a nation, living in our newly established Palestinian state, where we have 1,000 issues to think of, to look after, other than having an army or fighting Israel. We want our independence to stop fighting Israel. We're not seeking independence to start launching wars against the Israelis. And answering the second part of the question about the internal Palestinian problem, the moment, and I agree with what Nimrod said, because the moment there is an agreement on a two-state solution, even Hamas will have no reason to object it or reject it, only or simply because Hamas itself has changed its political platform and accepted the notion of a two-state solution, and they are moving slowly towards Israel, and they are talking to the Israelis day after day. They are coordinating everything with the Israelis, sometimes through the Egyptians and sometimes through the Qataris. So they don't have that kind of a veto that once they had against Israel or against any kind of a rapprochement or an accommodation with Israel. They might call it a truce, a long-term truce, and sometimes a long-term truce for 40 years is a lot better than a peace agreement signed between two states. The point is, the minute that there is a will on both sides to reach an agreement, security becomes a marginal issue. It's not a big deal. We will be serving Israel in a way. We are the human shield on the eastern front of Israel, in case there is any kind of an invading army. But even in today's wars or terminology, the kind of fears or security risks that Israel was worried about 4 decades ago, 6 decades ago, do not exist anymore. Technology is providing the best tools to monitor everything that moves across borders, whether between the state of Palestine and Jordan or between Israel, the state of Palestine and Israel. Things are doable. The only thing that we need to do is to take out the pens and sign an agreement. The people, the two sides, Palestinians and Israelis, are ready for it, but they need the spark. I remember the day the news came from Oslo of an agreement between the PLO and Israel. The same Palestinian students. I was a journalist at that time, and I used to send a dozen of camera crews covering the first Intifada, and we got pictures of the same Palestinians who used to throw stones at the Israeli soldiers and Molotov cocktails. The following day, after they heard the news, they took out to the streets, handing over olive branches to the Israeli soldiers, and even sometimes sweets, and that was the euphoria of peace that we have been waiting for. Help us to make it happen between us and the Israelis.
Thank you, Elias.
Thank
Fabulous.
you, Elias. Okay, I believe Joel wanted to ask a follow-up question.
Right. I just want to let people know that before he does, we are supposed to be finishing in approximately 7 minutes, but we're getting an extension. So if you are planning on leaving us, please stay with us. And I just want you to understand what's going on here. We're not just asking the average Yosef or Yusuf in Israel or Palestine. You're listening to experts here. And what we're hearing is amazing stuff. And I'm sure most of you have never heard this before. So please, Joel, go ahead with your last question, and then we'll have closing statements.
Yeah, I look forward to working with everybody to raise money for an organization, nonprofit 501c3, that can bring these guests into the Congress and into the national media. They must be heard, or we're not going to have peace. It's just that simple. My question is the following. When I spoke to the son of the general of the Palestinian Authority, who told me that his father was in charge of joint security between the Palestinian Authority and the IDF and the Mossad, I was stunned. I'd never heard of that before. Number one, how do we get the message out that the Palestinian Authority and Israel already have a security arrangement to keep both, people safe? But number two, I asked the following question. If there's already a security arrangement between the Israelis and the Palestinian Authority, would it then not make sense for Israel to immediately consider sitting down with the Palestinian Authority, negotiating a peace deal? It'd be great if Hamas could join. And then I'll close by saying it'd be the equivalent of not making a peace deal. I mean, could you imagine if Canada and the United States were having joint security arrangements and there had been tension, and then they didn't, and America said, we're going to occupy Quebec? This doesn't make any sense to me. It's ridiculous. And I know it's more complicated than that, but as a policy analyst, I don't understand why we just wouldn't make an agreement with another government that's keeping Israel secure. Please help me.
Okay, Elias had his hand up straight away. Elias, please go ahead.
Yes.
And keep it short, please, because we don't have much time. I'm sorry.
Okay. In 10 years of the previous government under Netanyahu, when there was no political process at all, and even when there was some political move, there were some political moves during the time that John Kerry served as Secretary of State. Throughout all those 10 years, and despite the lack of political progress, the Palestinian Authority honored her part of the deal of the making sure that security is maintained, prevented, and this you can hear it from various heads of Israeli security apparatuses who have testified to this before the Knesset and everywhere else about the role the Palestinian Authority played in order to prevent all sorts of attacks on Israelis. So we even honored our obligations in the security protocol with Israel at a time that Israel did not honor the political party of the protocol with us. That means that when a state in a situation or in a scenario where a two-state solution is signed, we will have a million reasons more to maintain that security coordination with the Israelis and make sure that at the end of the day, we will be a tiny state whose security is dependent on Israel's security. And if something goes wrong on the Israeli side, we will be the first to pay the price. And we don't want to pay the price anymore. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Anat, you had your hand up, please.
Yes, thank you. Let me tell you what I think is the major obstacle for peace. I think the major obstacle for peace is the asymmetry between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The fact that what I said in the opening statement, the fact that Israel enjoys prosperity while the Palestinians are under occupation. The asymmetry is reflected also in the fact that the average Israelis don't think that there is an occupation. They don't pay any price. So they don't feel any urgency to reach a solution. The asymmetry is not only between the Israelis and Palestinians, but also between Jews and Arabs. It's also between Jews and Muslims. The asymmetry is also there is a gender asymmetry. So all these I think are reflected and reflect the fact that there is no peace negotiation at all. And I think the majority of Israelis, as I said, believe that the land of Israel is given to us by the Almighty God, and we own it. So they don't see why they should give up any pieces of land, of this holy land, to anybody, and they feel very good. I mean, the quality of life in Israel is really high in comparison to, of course, the Palestinians, but also objectively, it's really high. So there is no incentive. There is no real incentive or sense of urgency to do something else and to reach an agreement now. I say it with pain. No, not that I believe this is the way. I think we pay very high prices, but they are not defined, and there is no price tag that we can define and see and focus on. But we pay very high prices as a society.
Thank you, Anat. Could I'd like to call on Warda to also respond to that, please.
And after that, I would prefer if we can then make our closing statements, because we're very late. Thank you very much, Warda.
Okay, thank you. I will continue from where Anat was. I was lately in a meeting, and they spoke about the situation in Israel by asking, do you think that it is necessary to make peace with Palestinians? And unfortunately, many Israeli said they don't care even for that. And why? Because they are in the, as I wrote in the comments, they feel that they are in the comfort zone, that nothing is moving or nothing is pushing them to make peace. And some of the ideas were maybe because Palestinian during the last 15 years during Netanyahu and even before were asking to make peace peacefully, not as was before with Intifada. I don't call for Intifada. I said we have Israel have to use that situation that Palestinian and the Palestinian leaders call for peacefully for negotiation and to make peace. And this is what I also address my leaders, because I think I have both leaders, the Israeli one and the Palestinian one. It's nothing will be with war. Only lose-lose, and in peace we can get only win-win for the both people.
Thank you, Warda. And now we're going to go on to the closing statements. I'd like to ask everyone to just take a minute, since we are running out of time. I'd like to ask, is Yair Golan on now? Oh, no, he's not.
No,
anyway,
he's still not with us.
Warda, could
hopefully he'll join us. So let's continue.
Okay. So Warda, could you give your closing statement, please? Just 1 minute, if you could.
So I just said that peace is win-win for the both people, and we have to push it forward by use this situation that President Abbas want, and he is still there to make peace, and Bennett shall rid of his ego and push his also his government to make that peace.
Okay, great. Thank you, Warda. Nimrod, would you like to go next, please?
Thank you. I hope that when we have this national debate over the two-state solution, which we do not have at the moment, I agree with the characterization of the Israeli mindset that Anat submitted, which is that there is no sense of urgency. I disagree with her in the best tradition of Israeli pluralism. I disagree with her interpretation of where Israelis are on the subject once they are asked to focus on it. They're not focused on it. But when you ask them to focus on it, I differ with her. I think that there is only a minority that believes that the fact that it was God-given should drive policy. The majority looks at it in a much more pragmatic way and supports pragmatic solutions. And once we have that debate, I would like to pledge only one thing, that those who are now 300 and hopefully will be 400 by then, Israeli retired security experts who served the country for three and a half decades each at the top positions of the Israeli national security, that when that debate takes place, those people will make their voice heard with two messages. One that I already mentioned, which is when done right, peace and security are mutually reinforcing. And two, a message to the leader: take the initiative and we'll have your back.
Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you, Nimrod. Anat, you're next.
Thank you. I want to call upon our audience, the progressive Americans, to help us strengthen the progressive camp in Israel and echo our voices of those who do believe in peace and do believe in equity and do believe in that the solution is possible. Please support us and help us. We can't do it alone. We do need you as our allies. And this should be the hope that we can hold to. Thank you.
Thank you, Anat. And Elias, you have the last word on this. Go ahead, please.
Well, what can I say other than that, expressing my hope that finally our friends, the American people at large, listen to the voices of reason coming out from this part of the world, where Palestinians and Israelis agree exactly on what they need and what is a win-win solution for both sides. And I think that I repeat myself again. I have to repeat this again and remind you that time is of the essence. That time is of the essence, and that we have to move soon, because frankly, we don't know what will happen on the Palestinian side should President Abbas disappear from the political arena. And as long as we can do something today, let's do it and not wait until tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. This is the Middle East. It's always full of surprises. We have to knock down those unwanted surprises, let's put it that way, and help us to help each other. Thank you.
Excellent.
Great. And now we're going to move on to the, I'm going to give a closing statement, and my co-moderator will also give a closing statement. So I want to thank you all for being here to participate in this critical topic. We hope you've been impacted by these personal stories. They're real stories from real people. Peace, I'll end again by saying peace is possible and the only way. There you go. I've said it. Our musicians, Noah and Mira, have said it. We've all said it. Peace is the only way because it is the promise of an agreement that contains the elements important to satisfy the concerns of both sides that should be energizing to us to find a way to get there. The current instability benefits neither side, and the violence similarly benefits neither side. This is the time for us to summon our courage to trust, move beyond fear to love, and that understand that there is a better way. This is why I call on all of you here to reach out to your leaders, wherever you may be, members of Congress, members of the Knesset, the Prime Ministry, and of course the Biden administration, to ask the incredible talent of our diplomats and envoys to get back to the negotiating table. Let's get this peace process in place again, now, for generations to come. I'll end by inviting you to stay tuned to our symposium program, as this is not the last you will hear from us. There's so much more to be discussed. Please stay tuned and look forward to seeing you. And please don't keep our symposium a secret. Until next time, inshallah. Salam, shalom, peace, and namaste.
Thank you, Fatima. Excellent. I'll not repeat a word of what you said because you were spot on, as you usually are. I will thank all of our speakers. I find it hard to imagine that I would actually get thrilled by talking about the topic of security, but I was thrilled tonight to hear each of you. It was very important. I think it's important for all of our viewers around the world. I want you to understand that we have many questions left over, but that also this is not the last symposium that we will run regarding security, and that we also have plans for other topics to be discussed. Our third symposium was from a woman's perspective, and we will be repeating that, which is organized entirely by women, and women are the only speakers there. So that's one of them. We're thinking of having a youth symposium where you'll hear also from our future, all of our future, from all of us around here. We're also considering having an economic symposium where we'll be speaking with those who are interested in investing in an agreement, not just saying that somebody else should do it, but actually doing some footwork that'll be good for all people all around. So I thank everyone, and especially Dr. Rodney Sadler's team have done fabulous work, as Rodney has, and I will pass the microphone to Rodney for his final benediction. That would be great. Thank you all for watching.
Thank you all for watching.
And, excuse me, one more word, and that is that if you didn't see it tonight, or you have friends who didn't see it tonight, tell them that they can use the same link to watch this, the recorded version, anytime they want. That's all.
Amen. Thank you, Moshe. Thank you, Fatima. It's wonderful to hear you all. Thank you all for participating in this incredibly brilliant event. Let's end with a word of prayer. Lord Elohim, Hashem, Allahu Akbar, Holy One, we may not know the way to peace. We may not have the power to proclaim it so, may not have the will to manifest it now, may not have the ears of those who can, may not know the things that make for peace yet. But we place our work with your work. We join you as co-workers with God. We join you fostering shalom, salam, peace. We will model a new way. We will foster a new community. We will foster beloved community. We will foster your community. May we be beloved community. May we be your community. And in part through us, may shalom, salam, peace come. May we all win. Palestinians, Israelis, humanity. By many names we call on you. In all of them, we are grateful to you. Amen. God bless you all, and goodbye.
Thank you all.
Amen. Thank you.
I wish I could invite you to join us. The Jewish Israeli public is preparing for Hanukkah, so I'm having a typical
a lot of calories.
Is that a donut, or is that a Berliner?
Donut with a jelly-filled donut, and
Berliner.
So everyone for the following holidays that are coming up. Happy holidays to all, and thank you again.